Hello, everybody, and welcome to my first impressions of Lords of the Fallen. A lot of which are positive, but I do have some issues with the game that I hope Hexworks can keep working on. Of course, a big thank you to CI Games and Hexworks for allowing me, little old me, to play this game early and give my impressions and also give a lot of feedback directly to the devs. So let's jump into first what I think Lords of the Fallen is doing that's different to other Souls-likes and my most positive experience with the game, and that is the Umbral lamp mechanic and everything that comes with that, because this is a mechanic that is really fleshed out. It's not just a little gimmick where you can see into another world, it's a fully fleshed out thing. So you are equipped with a lamp that can see into the world of the dead, also known as Umbral, at any time during your journey. This means that essentially two worlds are being rendered at the exact same time, and you have two worlds at any time to explore. You do this by holding up your lamp to peer into Umbral or fully committing yourself into entering the Umbral realm. The regular realm and the Umbral realm both have their own loot, places to explore, shortcuts to unlock, secrets to find, and enemies to fight. All of those enemies do drop weapons and armor. I ended up getting some legs from like this pregnant mama lady. So exploring both is definitely going to be a thing that you're going to want to do, and in some cases you're going to have to do, because you're going to want to traverse the Umbral realm to get to certain places in the regular realm. Now, the longer you are in Umbral, the more enemies that spawn and the more deadly those enemies will be, ultimately ending up in this red enemy that hunts you down forever until you can find a place to rest. And it is extremely dangerous to be in there at that point. You are not able to heal. You have constant enemy spawning all over the place whilst you're also running away from this very scary enemy. However, while you are in Umbral, you're also working up a vigor, which is this game's versions of Souls, multiplier. So you are rewarded for staying in there longer if you're wanting to farm for vigor in order to level up or buy an item, but it's obviously very dangerous to do that. This mechanic essentially means that each area of the game is actually two areas, which I find really cool. I would very often find myself doing a full kind of playthrough of an area with the regular realm, but of course going into Umbral when I need to cross and find shortcuts and figure out puzzles and stuff like that. But I also found myself just wanting to do a pure Umbral exploration so that I can double make sure that I didn't miss anything, because this game absolutely invites you and incentivizes you to fully explore everything. So if you're one of those people where you don't want to miss anything, you're going to be spending a good amount of time combing through these areas in the regular realm and also the Umbral realm. This is very reminiscent of Soul Reaver, if you remember that game from a long time ago, if you're old. And with the power of UE5, both of these realms look absolutely beautiful. I did see some feedback from some people that they don't like that the Umbral realm is kind of this blue-gray thing going on, but I personally don't mind it. It makes it look very, very creepy. The regular realm has this dark gothic vibe that we're kind of familiar with Souls games, and Umbral does have that bluey kind of gray thing, but it has really creepy structures that are actually kind of reminiscent of Scorn, if you guys checked out Scorn earlier. You'll see eyeballs following you. You'll see these massive like skeleton structures. It is genuinely quite unnerving the first time that you are in Umbral, because you know that you're on a time limit before things get real spooky and everything just looks creepy and weird. Plus, enemies could not be there, and then all of a sudden they are there, because again, the longer you're in Umbral, the more enemies that spawn. So initially you're running around and there's not that many, and then all of a sudden there's enemies spawning behind you while you're trying to complete an environmental puzzle. The lamp mechanic isn't just for exploring either. You can actually use it in combat to suck out an enemy's soul, literally like a Lowy in League of Legends. And you do direct soul damage to them. So it does a bunch of posture damage, and it does a lot more damage if you're hitting their soul and then you end up hitting the actual enemy. The posture or poise system, by the way, is indicated by a little small dot on an enemy. I would love an accessibility option to make that circle bigger, which is currently not a thing, but I could see it being a little bit hard for people to see just how much posture damage they have done to an enemy with it being that little circle. The thing that I love doing with the Umbral lamp, especially in these areas where you're just running through rafters high in the sky and every enemy's trying to knock you off, is you can actually pull their soul out and direct the direction that the soul goes into with your left thumbstick and pull them off the edge. Because wherever their soul ends up being, that is where the enemy is kind of snapped back to when the soul returns to their body. So if you're ever on a ledge and you have a tough enemy, just send that motherfucker off to the side because it will instantly kill them. You get all of the loot, you get all of the souls from it. So that is the way that I would deal with anything that's tough. The lamp is also heavily used in environmental puzzles and also to listen to these type of audio logs that give extra lore about the world, and they also give you some rewards every time you listen to one of them. Overall, just a very cool mechanic for exploration and combat that I find to be the biggest strength of this game. It makes exploring interesting and vast and makes you really want to dig in and make sure that you find absolutely everything. It also switches up exploring an area. You're not just seeing the same thing looking the same way the entire time that you're in an area. You're exploring two different worlds. And I personally love this mechanic. I think it makes the game very unique compared to other Souls-likes. And as soon as I realized that enemies, no matter where they are, drop all of their armor and all of their weapons, I legitimately spent a long time in Umbral trying to farm enemies' armor and weapons. It's really fun. It's very, very fun. Now, seeing as we just did what I think is the game's biggest strength, I think it's only fair to do what I find to be the game's biggest weakness, in my opinion. And that is, unfortunately, the combat. I don't think that the combat is bad, but I can't say that it's great. My biggest issue being feedback, and the best possible example that I can give you is when you're parrying an attack that doesn't lead to a critical hit. This happens on bosses and elite enemies because you have to get their poise down to 0 in order to do the critical hit, which I'm sure you're familiar with. And when you're fighting an elite or a boss, you're not just going to parry them once and destroy their poise and get a critical hit. Here's what it sounds like when you parry for a critical hit. And here's what it sounds like when you parry and it's not leading into a critical hit. There's, in my opinion, just not enough audio or visual feedback to tell you that they definitely hit the parry versus guarding, especially as you take chip damage regardless. So the way that this kind of system works is that if you guard, you're going to take this kind of gray health damage, which you can recover by attacking. All of that health that's in gray or white, you will get that health back by attacking. Now, if you parry, you still get that white health, but you do get less of it than if you're guarding. So you can't tell by that. And in some games, you can tell that you hit the parry because you didn't take any damage at all. But in this game, because you are taking that chip damage no matter what, and the audio and visual feedback is a little bit lacking when it comes to hitting those parries, I found that I had to look at my health. I'm like, okay, how much gray health did I actually take there? Okay, that's not that much. Maybe that was a parry. And then I'd have to look at the enemy's poise meter to see if I actually did a good amount of poise damage. That is when I then knew that I hit a parry and not a guard. So I would really love for them to just add even the sound that they have for when you hit a parry and it's a critical hit, add that sound to regular parrying. I give it some more flair, some more sparks. I think Lies of P is a perfect example of how to make a parry feel really, really, really good, even if it's not leading to a critical hit. You got sparks flying, you got big clangs going on, and I think that's really what we need when it comes to feedback on the parry. Also, just a small note, you do take chip damage when you parry, but you will not die if you parry. So if you've taken a bunch of chip damage, you've been parrying your ass off, and you have literally no health except that white health, if you do hit the parry, you will not die. You can stay on that, like, basically no health except for your white health forever, as long as you don't get hit. So that was good to know. That would have really sucked if you could die from a parry because of this chip damage mechanic. Hexworks have been extremely open to feedback during this initial first embargo early access phase. They've been putting out patches constantly. They've been asking questions and clarifying stuff. So I think that it's totally possible that this could be fixed even before launch later this week, because we have evidence of that. When they first announced a gameplay trailer, people heard the audio of the combat and they were not happy with it. And Hexworks did work very, very quickly to make that audio sound better. And it definitely sounds better from then. I just think it still needs a little bit of a touch up. Hi, this is Watts from the future, or Editing Watts, and I just heard news that the team over at Hexworks is indeed doing a pass on the parry audio and visual effects. There you have it. The team listens to feedback and implements fixes incredibly quickly. We love to see it. Player movement is also something that I think could be tuned a little bit. You run very, very, very fast, which might not seem bad, but it does make the animation look a little funky because you're running so fast that your little arms are swinging around trying to keep up. Also, the dodge in this game makes you move really far, which again, you might think that's great. I can get away from bosses, but it actually ends up feeling like you have less control over your character, especially if you're wearing light armor. If you're wearing light armor, you are zooming with your dodge. You're going so far, so fast. And this game, in the early access portion, which I'm sure continues throughout the game, you have a lot of areas that you're jumping, that you're running along rafters, you're fighting enemies in like these really small corridors that have big drops. And I felt like I could not dodge in those areas because you're just so slippery and so slidey and you move so far. So I would actually like the speed to be brought down a little bit and the dodge distance also brought down a little bit, because there is that sweet spot between a really good dodge that's going to do what it needs to do and a dodge that you feel like you're in control of and then things just being a bit crazy. So I think that could be tuned a little bit as well. Combat moves can also move you across an area quite far, which I think is why people are saying that the combat seems floaty, because both you and enemies will do an attack animation and travel pretty far with that attack animation. None of this makes me less interested in the game, but especially coming off of Lies of P, where their combat is so tight and so feels so good, you definitely notice that feedback is a little lacking and combat movement can look a little weird sometimes. But I will say, even with all of that said, you do end up kind of getting used to Lords of the Fallen combat. It's strange. I've never had this experience before, and I've actually heard this from other people in their first impressions. But when I first started the game, and you can kind of tell if you watch any of my VODs on Twitch of when I first got into the game, that I looked kind of awkward. I didn't really know how to control the character. I felt like I couldn't control the dodge. I didn't know the spacing of enemy attacks, so a lot of the time you'll see me back up or dodge out of the way to get away from an attack to heal, but I'll get hit because instead of using my iframes to dodge the attack, I thought that I was far enough away from the attack. But because enemies do have this quite forward momentum with some of their attacks, I ended up getting hit a lot because I thought I was far away enough. Now, I am still cognizant of this stuff in combat, but I will say after a couple hours playing Lords of the Fallen, I got used to it. I got used to it, and combat legit started feeling better, which again, I've never had that feeling before. I'm usually either like the combat's bad and it doesn't get better, or the combat's great and it continues to be great. Lords of the Fallen is a strange one, because sometimes the animations are a little bit funky and look a little bit weird, and sometimes the feedback is not that great in terms of like the parry situation that I showed you guys, but combat doesn't feel bad. And you do get used to it, and the more you get used to it, the better it starts to feel. So if you do load up Lords of the Fallen and you're loving the environment, you're loving the bosses, the armor, the lore, the world, everything that's going on, but you don't love the combat right away, I would give it a little bit to see if you get used to it, because I did. And combat did start feeling a lot better. So just be aware of that. You may jump into the game and think that things feel a little weird, but combat does not feel clunky like the original Lords of the Fallen at all. It just has a bit of, like I said, some strange animations sometimes, a bit of a lack of feedback. and some stuff you have to get used to. There are, however, things that I do like about combat. I really enjoy the ammo or mana system. If you have throwing knives or a bow, crossbow equipped, you will have an ammo bar, which is displayed below the stamina bar. If you have a catalyst equipped to do magic, then there will be a blue bar below the stamina bar showing your current mana. Resting at Vestiges, which is this game's version of bonfires, will completely refill this bar. And you also have items that you can use to replenish the ammo or mana while exploring the world. It feels really liberating, especially on the ammo front, because I think we're used to resting and getting our mana back, but we don't rest and get our ammo back. To not have to constantly farm or purchase arrows and throwing knives. This makes me a lot more excited when I find a new arrow that can inflict bleed or poison or do radiant damage. Because now I have that arrow forever. If I have ammo pouches, I can replenish. If I rest, I'm fully replenished. So this just makes me end up using more of those special ammo. I'm not just using regular arrows because I'm so scared that I don't know where I can get these bleed arrows. Can I farm them? Do I have to purchase them? It feels incredibly liberating. I can go to a boss and use all of the things at my disposal. I can use my lamp because that replenishes when you rest. I can use all of my ammo. I can use my special ammo because I know that I'm going to get it back. And I really, really like that. Also, the bow is pretty damn effective. I'm really not used to ranged weapons being good at all in these kind of games, and in Lords of the Fallen they definitely feel useful, especially as this game tends to throw a lot of enemies at you at once. So being able to pick off some with ranged combat is very, very helpful. So I think they did great with that system, and I think they've also done great with ranged combat. It is genuinely useful for doing damage. Now let's jump into graphics and performance, starting with the graphics because, I mean, yeah, this game looks great. Lords of the Fallen has been described as the first true next-gen Souls-like, and I totally get why. They're really putting UE5 to work with the detail in the environments and on the armor. You'll be doing a disservice to yourself if you don't stop sometimes to take in the vistas or get close up to a super detailed fixture or even close up to your armor. This game comes with photo mode, so you at any time can go super close and check out the details in your armor. And man, these things are good looking. With how beautiful this game is, how exactly does it perform? Generally, it performs quite well, and you'll see what I might mean by generally. I played for about 9 hours on the first day without any crashes, and only experienced crashes on some follow-up patches that caused some issues, but those have now been fixed by the devs. I kid you not, there were like 3 patches during this early access period, which I think was like a couple of days. These guys are on top of it, which really makes me wish that a public beta did happen, because I really think that would have done wonders for this team, because again, they're very fast to react to any issues, and with a mass beta, they would have gotten some real good feedback when it comes to performance on lots of different types of machines. My frame rate was generally between 100 to 110 FPS, but when I was in Umbral, my FPS did sit around the 80 mark. There are, however, some areas where my frame rate had dropped to be below 60 FPS, and when that happened, coupled with a lot of enemies, it became a little frustrating. I only found 2 of these areas where this happened in early access though, so largely my early access experience was smooth. I highly, highly recommend checking out gameplay and reviews for your system of choice when it comes to performance before pre-ordering, but I've heard some good things about the PS5 version so far, and overall the PC version has been fine. But this, again, is from content creators with generally pretty beefy PCs. It wasn't a public beta, so do execute some caution and seek out some gameplay reviews, performance reviews, to see if you're going to have a good experience running this game. I have a lot more that I want to talk about when it comes to specific systems in this game that I actually think are pretty cool, but this covers my first experiences with combat, lamp mechanic, graphics, performance, and I don't want this video to be like an 80-minute video where I'm jumping into every single system. So I will have videos going over those systems in detail, but for now, this is my first impressions. Overall, I think Lords of the Fallen is a good game that offers a lot of exploration, tons of content to farm for drops because, again, every enemy drops their armor and their weapons in a world that looks very, very good. It's let down a bit by combat that doesn't have that punchy feedback that I would personally like, as well as having some slight issues with the AI of enemies where they can get stuck on terrain. So I would say that if you are someone who really enjoys exploring games, you will love Lords of the Fallen. If you're someone who doesn't really care that much about exploration and you play games entirely for combat, then I would recommend watching some gameplay, which there's plenty of on YouTube right now, to see if that combat looks and sounds satisfying to you before purchasing. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will be streaming my entire playthrough of Lords of the Fallen starting this week, so if you want to watch it live, come drop by. Feel free to ask me any questions that you have about the game. I would love to answer them. And stay tuned for more Lords of the Fallen videos. Thank you guys so much. Bye!